Welcome to the Lancaster Patriot podcast. My name is Chris Hume, and I am the managing editor of the Lancaster Patriot, a newspaper and media company serving Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and beyond. I'm joined today, once again, by the redoubtable Joel Saint.
Good to be here.
Local pastor of Independent Reformed Bible Church and executive director of the Mid-Atlantic Reformation Society. Maybe I should say the infamous Joel Saint. So today I want to talk to Joel about Amos Miller, a case of a local farmer here in Lancaster County. So we're going to cover that story, provide some analysis, biblical commentary on it. Before we start with that, a word from one of our advertisers, Honeybrook Hardware. Okay, if you've never been to Honeybrook Hardware, it's on 5004, so 5004 Horseshoe Pike in Honeybrook. Winter's just around the corner. Time to get ready is now. Save 5% off all in-stock Toro and Cub Cadet snowblowers now through September 10th at Honeybrook Hardware. I've never had a snowblower. Have you?
No, I have not.
I've always shoveled the snow.
It's amazing how good they work or how well they work.
Yeah, I've had neighbors who have used them, and it's incredible. So, I might have to get one here for the first time in my life. Go to Honeybrook Hardware. If you don't know which snowblower is best for your property, the team at the store can help you choose the right equipment that fits your needs and your budget. Honeybrook Hardware, your local family-owned hardware store. So go to Honeybrook. Don't go to the big corporations. Go to the local family-owned hardware store for all your hardware needs, especially snowblowers, as winter will be here before we know it. Okay, so Amos Miller and his farm. Now, this is a story that has been getting a lot of attention locally, even national attention. Tucker Carlson actually spoke about this on Fox News on Monday night. Other media outlets such as Rebel News are covering it as well. And of course, we're covering it here at the Lancaster Patriot. The latest from Michael Yoder is in our most recent edition of the Lancaster Patriot. I want to give a brief summary of the story. We're going to continue to cover this in the paper, online. I want to give a brief summary and then get some comments and interaction and analysis from Joel as we look at this from a biblical perspective. So, Amos Miller runs Miller's Organic Farm. In 2000, just to kind of give a brief background, Amos and his father met Sally Fallon, who's involved with Weston A. Price Foundation. A lot of you have heard about them. I know they've been very instrumental in a lot of the health and food decisions that my family has made going back, I guess, 12 years now to the birth of my first child. And after Amos and his father met Sally Fallon and really started to research natural foods, going back to the way that God designed food to be prepared, processed, preserved, as they researched that, they became very convinced of the health benefits of fresh, unprocessed dairy foods and other products. And so they started a farm to provide those products to their neighbors. And this is from Amos Miller's farm website. It says, as of July 2009, the demand for true, fresh dairy food has practically exploded, and we remain focused on keeping our products wholesome and nutrient-dense. Now, the story here, of course, is that the USDA has been on his farm. Allegedly, U.S. Marshals showed up on one occasion in approximately 6 vehicles and came on the property. So what's their beef with Amos? Well, basically, to put it in a nutshell here, Amos is not following their USDA-approved guidelines. So the USDA says, well, if you're going to sell these products on the market, you need to follow our rules, and it's not enough for your customers to make the decision to buy from you. You need to jump through these hoops for us. Now, about 6 years ago, the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service, represented by the U.S. Justice Department, filed a civil action seeking to make Miller and his farm comply with federal meat and poultry food safety. We're going to come back to this idea that this is all about food safety, right? So they're supposedly, they're not following the food safety statutes. The Department of Justice sought to force Miller to operate under the federal grant of inspection before his farm may slaughter, prepare, process, or sell for distribution any meat or poultry products. Now, there's a slight caveat in there, which we'll talk about. Water buffalo is an animal that's not apparently regulated by the USDA. So Amos is able to raise these animals, butcher them, and sell them. And by the way, I actually had some water buffalo milk the other day from his farm, and it was delicious.
Wow.
Absolutely delicious, yeah.
Didn't know you could do that.
It's delicious, so I highly recommend it. So this is from justice.gov. It says, in granting that motion, the district court, by the way, I think it was Attorney General McSwain, I could be wrong here, but who was running for governor, who was involved in this. So kind of disappointing that and obviously this started under the Trump administration. Democrats and Republicans in general have been about big government controlling our food. We'll get to that, I'm sure. But this is from justice.gov. In granting that motion, the district court entered judgment against Mr. Miller and the farm and enjoined them from continuing selling of non-federally inspected, misbranded meat and poultry products to nationwide customers and from continued obstruction of federal health and safety oversight. So, again, federal health and safety oversight. We'll come back to that idea. Now, from my understanding, one of the main reasons that Amos would prefer not to get this federal grant of inspection is because it would force him and his farm to alter their practices. So Amos sells to private consumers. It's a private food club. People willingly agree to buy his products, knowing that they come from his farm, that they're not USDA approved. They willingly make that decision. Amos is not selling his products in the grocery store. It's a private food buying club. Now, one of the reasons why he does not want to get this federal grant of inspection, I want to read here from basically a press release, a fax that came over from Miller Organic Farm. And it says this: Amos doesn't want to adulterate his food with the chemicals the USDA requires on all meat processed in USDA licensed facilities, even those allowed by the USDA NOP organic standards. And he believes that he should be able to supply all animal organs to his members, not just the ones the USDA says he can. So two things there. One, that in order to be federally approved, there has to be certain preservatives or chemicals. If he were to send his meat off to a USDA facility, his customers don't want that. They want the food coming right from his. I've been in his facility. It's clean. It's organized. I'd rather have my meat coming from there than a USDA-approved facility. Also, apparently, the USDA regulates what can and can't be sold as far as the organs. But Amos's customers want to buy, whatever organs they would like, whether it's the eye, the brain, make soup with that. Anything they want to use from the animal, Amos would like to be able to sell them. And this could be limited if he goes under this federal grant of inspection. So, right now, Amos is not butchering, or from my understanding, is not butchering or processing any new orders on the animals the USDA does, regulate. So he's not butchering the beef and the chickens and the pork. He's just really doing the water buffalo. And how is this a good thing? Amos is not able to feed his neighbors. So we'll talk about that here. He has some fines to pay. He's still seeking resolution. We'll talk about by the way, because of this media attention, a lot of the fundraising sites have just went off the charts for Amos Miller, so that's good. So let me lay out here the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, and then I'm going to talk about this with you, Joel. So best case scenario, from my, looking at this from a biblical perspective, is that the government would stop its ungodly practice and let Amos sell his food to whoever wants to buy it. Worst case scenario is he's shut down due to these federal regulations, that his customers no longer want his meat if he's forced to send them off to a USDA certified facility. They want it from Amos. And his food's not cheap. It's not cheap, but it's high quality, it's delicious, and it's nutrient dense. There are people that will pay for this top dollar for this food because they've done the research and they want to feed their family with food that has come from a local farmer, everything on his farm. He's not sending it off. It's not these big plants where the steer are packed into a building. They're out on the pasture. So it's not cheap food, but it's quality food. And worst case scenario, this shuts down. Now, there could be some options in between that I don't think would be ideal, but we could talk about them. So that's a summary of what's going on with Amos Miller. If you want more, go to LancasterPatriot.com. There's a lot of information on it. I want to get into this now with you, Joel, and start talking about this. Number one, let's talk about this idea that, the reason the federal government is doing this is because they're concerned about our health and safety, right? That's what this is about. And, because the feds are fine, but now, see, I don't think that's the case, though, and I want to get your thoughts on this, because I think it's really about money. Because if the feds were truly concerned with the health and safety, they would tell Amos that he can't be selling the water buffalo. The problem right now is that the USDA doesn't have that on their list, so there's nothing they can really do about it. I think, and probably there's not a lot of farmers that are raising water buffalo, so it doesn't really benefit them to regulate it and tax it and do these fines. But it seems to me they're more interested in the money and the control than actually in the health and safety of the customers.
Chris, I'm curious. So So which customers complained about Amos, that his food tasted bad, was poisoning them? Which of his customers? I understand he has close to 1,000 or maybe more.
I think 4,000.
4,000.
If I'm not mistaken.
So
For
for 4,000 customers, he must have had a lot of people complaining about his awful product, right?
Well, you might think that, but no, there are no complaints that I'm aware of.
Wait a minute, 4,000 customers, no complaints. And the only complaints are from the USDA, which isn't even buying his food. Am I right?
That's right. Now, and there is one allegation that someone who drank some raw milk that possibly there was listeria connected to may have consumed it. But that is a story we're actually going to be reporting on. Allegedly, the family of that customer denies that that was related, and they were upset that this was even tied to Amos's farm. So, yeah.
So who's making the case then? Somebody, some third party is saying you got listeria and because we said so, and the family's saying no? Is that what's going on here?
Yeah, there's a lot to that seems going on behind the scenes, but the people that are really trying to control this is the federal government.
Okay.
And it goes back to why.
Okay.
You know, I mean, is it the food, is it health and safety? Because if that's the case, we know of many outbreaks that have occurred in certified facilities.
Sure.
And if you look at how some of those facilities are operated, they're very unsanitary conditions, right?
Well, see, that was my next question, right? We've never had an outbreak in a USDA-approved facility. That's never happened, right?
I think we both know that's not true.
Yeah. So here we have USDA-approved facilities where we've had outbreaks, and we have another non-USDA facility where we've had no outbreaks. And who's in trouble? Mm-hmm. Am I getting this correct?
Right. And the other thing to note is, especially with listeria, people want to buy this food, right? You could look at it and say, well, yeah, if you ultra pasteurize all your milk and you'll get rid of all the enzymes and all the chance of any bacteria potentially. And you also destroy a lot of the nutritional value, right? And people want to buy their products from Amos. And that's the other thing here that I do want to get into is that the people are willingly make that choice to say, you know what, I would rather drink the raw milk or the naturally raised beef, even if there is a potential of bacteria. I mean, the past 2 years we've experienced the hysteria of people that, well, you can't even be exposed to anything. Forget about your immune system. I mean, before I moved back, I was originally from Pennsylvania. Before I moved back, I was in a state where raw milk sales were illegal. They were illegal, right? Supposedly for the best interest of us, right? Mm-hmm. No, not at all. That wasn't why. But we still purchased the raw milk, and I think I want to get into this eventually on the fact that we didn't submit, so to speak, to the government mandate there, and we gave that raw milk because of health reasons and research that we did, and we were more than willing. We trusted that farmer more than the government, and we never had an issue with the raw milk. And even if we would have, I would not have went back to that farmer and said, how dare you, I'm holding you liable. I chose to go to that farmer and make that decision, knowing that this milk is not pasteurized, and that's what I would prefer. Sure. So that's a big part of this, too.
Yeah. Well, it's a couple things. First of all, I want to talk about the limits of civil authority. In other words, do we have a federal government to tell us what we can and can't eat and drink? Like, none of us knew. Most of the time we didn't have a USDA in this country. And during that time, none of us knew how to eat or drink, right? And we were just always drinking poison all the time, right? Thankfully, now we have the USDA to tell us, no, see that skull and crossbones on that bottle, please don't drink any of that. No, I mean, if you go to the Bible, go to the scriptures, we can see what the role of the civil authorities is. And it's very limited. The ecclesiastical authorities have the role of the word, or the power of the word. The civil authorities have the power of the sword, if you will. And really, you see Romans 13 and also 1 Peter 2, you see that is their job. There's nowhere, and we have the law. I mean, this is the thing, Chris. The first 5 books of the Bible are called the book of the law. Deuteronomy is Moses explaining the law to people who are going to go into the land of Canaan. Now, if the reason why we had Moses and perhaps the people under him, if he would have said, hey guys, when we go into Canaan, make sure you set up a grand bureaucracy because nobody around here knows how to eat anything, well, then we could say, as a Christian, we should have a USDA. But since that is absent, what I'm saying is, as clearly as I can possibly say it, we don't need or want a USDA. We wouldn't all be killing ourselves if we didn't have the USDA. And who knows what bad they're doing. I mean, in other words, Chris, who's watching the watchers? Okay, they're watching over Amos Miller. Who's watching them? What if somebody's bribing them? What if someone's slipping money to them? Now what do? Now we don't have, you know what, it's going to come back to you and I once again. It's going to come back to our own ability to research. What I find amazing, we all now have access to the internet. We can do research like we never could in the past. We never could. And now it's just right there at our fingertips, and we're being regulated even more. I want to talk about this because it's freedom that's under attack. It's not just Amos Miller. It's 4,000 customers of his that now don't have a choice. And this is what happens when the civil authority, when we all become statists and we look to the state for salvation. That's what's going on here. The USDA will protect us. The Department of Labor will protect us. It's just too difficult being free out there. And all I can think of is that horrific, the children of Israel, right? They cross the Red Sea, and it's almost like freedom was scary for them. But freedom is responsibility. And if we decide we don't want to be responsible under God, then we're going to get the USC. Then we're going to get other people making our decisions for us. And I'm thinking here of a passage here in 1 Kings where, I'll just read this. 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 25. Solomon had, and Judah and Israel dwelt safely, each man under his vine and under his fig tree, from Dan as far as Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. If you know your geography there, that's pretty much the length or the top and the bottom of the state of Israel, the Commonwealth of Israel at the time. Under his vine, under his fig tree, and they had peace. No one was allocating resources. No one was telling them, hey, you have 3 fig trees and they only have 2. I guess we're going to have to split that fig tree. No one was doing it. You know what? If you want to plant a fig tree, you could plant a fig tree. And if you wanted to sell figs from the fig tree, you could sell them to your neighbor. And if your neighbor didn't like figs, you didn't have to buy them. But oh no, now we have to have the federal government telling Amos Miller what he can and can't do. I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but there's something I want to talk about first very briefly, and that is the idea of choices. The more choices we have, Chris, the more wealth we have. This is one of the reasons why slight rabbit trail, I love, everybody should read the book Robinson Crusoe. It used to be a classic by Daniel Defoe.
It's a long book.
Long book, but read it. Reason why is when Robinson Crusoe, he's shipwrecked, you recall, and he's the only one left on the ship, and he has to get off the ship and bring everything of value to his little island. He lays, in the book, he leaves all kinds of coins, what we would call wealth, on the ship. And he takes off like axe heads, ropes, barrels, that kind of thing, gunpowder, that type of thing. Why? Because those things had value in that case.
And the Bible, of course.
He does take the Bible. And he realizes after a while that he should be reading it.
Right.
And it does affect his life because he starts to do what it says and be grateful for his situation instead of ungrateful, among other things. What I'm trying to say is this. Coins and money is no good without choices. I could be in the middle of the desert, have millions of dollars of bills, and I don't have any wealth. Or I could be in a place where I have choices to buy and have far less money but have far more wealth. And Amos Miller being attacked like this is an attack on his wealth. My point is, it's also an attack on the wealth of everyone who ever wants to buy from him. It is a flat-out attack, and it's more pernicious because it's in the name of protection.
In the name of safety. Yeah,
yes.
In the name of safety. So we're going to get back to this, what you mentioned with freedom, and digging a little more to that idea of each man under his fig tree from Scripture. I wanted to make a comment on the fact you said, who's watching the watchers. And one of the things behind this is that the big corporations are the ones that stand to benefit from this. The major food conglomerates, they want to control the farming industry. Now, I heard this, I don't know exactly the details of this, but something about Bill Gates trying to purchase farmland. Like, there's a reason these people want to control the industry. There's a lot of money in it, and control. Right? It was Henry Kissinger who said, control the food, you control the people. Now, why would big corporations want these regulations, though? You mentioned, so there's a book by Upton Sinclair, The Jungle, right, which is about the meatpacking industry in the U.S. I think the book took place in Chicago. The people come over from, I don't know if it's Lithuania or some Eastern European country, and they come over to America to work. And the book, Sinclair was a muckraker trying to expose the evil of these corporations. And they got some laws passed, but then as it turned out, even Sinclair came to admit that, well, what I did really didn't improve the conditions. And economist Murray Rothbard has written about this, and actually the ones that were advocating for these regulations were the big meatpacking corporations, because they knew if they could, the more red tape and hoops and fines and fees and regulations that people had to jump through, their competitors, the small guys, the mom and pops, the Amos Millers, if you will, wouldn't be able to compete. So when you look at, you have to keep that in mind, when you look at any government regulation or law, there's usually big corporations, some of them not. There's some behind it. And people say, well, see, that's the problem of capitalism. No, that's actually the opposite of capitalism. Because in capitalism, you wouldn't have the government getting involved at the behest of big corporations. The small mom and pop shops would be able to compete without the barriers to entry, without the excess fees and regulations. And so this attack, if you will, on Amos Miller is only going to help the big multi-billion-dollar food corporations. They would rather have control and keep all the slaughtering of animals done in 8 or 12 USDA-approved facilities, which, by the way, then goes to your choices. What happens if something happens to them, right? Then we really are out of food. So,
yeah, as you say, the USDA is out there saying that we're going to, and a lot of government bureaucratic organizations out there saying we're going to protect you. But the more people that they keep put out of business, again, the less wealth and the less choices you have. And I would urge everyone listening to this to consider what's going on here. Whenever you have a bureaucratic or government organization involved in commerce, what's inevitably going to happen is you are going to have less choices. They will eliminate choices. Mm-hmm. You can't enter because you don't have enough money. Right now, what's going on, I had a discussion with a friend of mine recently, and he's in the trucking business, and I didn't realize this, but I once had a Class A permit, and I had a Class B license. Drive truck, I could drive straight truck, couldn't drive a trailer, had the Class A permit. That was easy to get. Now, in order to be able to drive a Class A, tractor trailer, you have to pay around $4,000 to get all this training, have to take like 16 hours more of training. It's super expensive. The barrier to entry is huge. Now, why is this? At a time, Chris, you can't drive down the road without seeing all these advertisements on the back of the trailers. Mm-hmm. We pay such and such, and you're home every night, and all this kind of stuff. Thanks a lot. The Department of Transportation is here to make it even more difficult. Mm-hmm. And I would like to hear, Chris, I want to hear how this is going to make the road safer here. I want to tell you something. When I was, before I was a pastor, I worked for a concrete company. And we locked our guys out. It was a union situation. What was happening? Their contract ran out in June. Well, when the concrete business, June, July, August, May, June, July, that's when you're busiest. So we figured that they were going to go on strike and really try to, squeeze the money out of our company. So we locked them out early. And we had guys that had passed the test. They took, there were companies back then that had, we'll teach you how to drive a truck. And they passed the test, but they didn't know how to drive a truck. They couldn't hardly back it up. Or they could hardly back it up, I should say. Correct English. And I remember saying to the guy I work with, I said, I don't want these guys who have passed these tests. I want a 12-year-old farm boy who's been around equipment, who knows what he's doing.
Right.
And even more concerning, we already have transportation issues going on. We do not have enough. Now the federal government, in the name once again of protecting us, has just made it more difficult. And if we don't understand that's exactly what's happening to Amos Miller. And let's face it, Chris, can we talk? A federal government who is fine with the death of 60, 70 million babies is definitely not interested in our good health. Mm-hmm. Perhaps maybe as a taxpayer. And hopefully I'll die before I'm 65. That way they get to keep all my Social Security money. Let's be honest here. They're not interested in our health except as we can pay taxes here. And how about we start with the babies and then worry about Amos Miller? Let's do that.
Yeah, we hope and pray that our magistrates will come to see the hypocrisy of what they're doing, claiming to be about health and safety while giving the stamp of approval to the murder of millions of babies. So yes, so the big corporations stand to gain, many of them. You talked about the barrier to entry. Anytime the government gets involved and regulates the industry, even under the guise of this is for your good and safety, just like with the meatpacking industry and Sinclair's book, I mean, it's presented in a way that, oh, this is going to be for your good, and then people, when you really study it, you realize, well, all these regulations that came out of that time and that period led to less competition, less sanitary practices, and it hurts the customer ultimately. So same thing. Anytime there's another. You talk about barrier to entry just briefly. The medical field, with doctors, they put caps on how many doctors can we certify, how many physicians can we have, because if you cap that, the people who stand to gain are the current doctors. Yeah. Right? And so there's less competition for them. They're going to be the ones, many of them, the ones that don't believe in biblical principles, that are going to be lobbying the government to say, hey, we need to regulate the medical field, because if not, we're going to have these quacks out there practicing medicine. Well, we have them anyway.
I was going to say,
Dr. Fauci.
There's nobody out there now, right? There's Dr. Fauci out there. There's no quacks out there now.
So,
thanks a lot.
And obviously he's not practicing medicine per se, but that's the general idea. He's certainly making these policies from the chair, almost like the Pope, if you will. But it hurts the consumer then, because I want to make my own health choices. And if the government is, making, okay, we can only have this many doctors, what are those doctors? Are they going to be trying to provide a better service if they know that they're not going to be competing?
Yeah, what possible state compelling interest could there be in limiting the amount of doctors? And who makes that choice? Who watches that watcher? How did you come up with that?
Right. So let's talk about, let's get into this. Let's talk about taxes briefly. And you mentioned the interest of the state to have you pay your taxes. And that's, again, and we brought this up, that they're interested in this not for safety, but because of the control, right? The reason, maybe they'd say, well, if we can get water buffalo on our approved list, then we'll definitely come after you for that too. But right now it's not, so they really can't. But the reason it's probably not on there is because so few farmers raise that animal. And so we're going to regulate the things that most people do so we can benefit from that. And you talked about, the Israelites coming into the land, the promised land, and that there was not this call for a bureaucracy to govern food and to collect all these taxes. And I wanted to read a passage here from Amos 5, because this idea of being taxed, of being regulated, is throughout Scripture. And it's presented in a negative way. Mm-hmm. It's presented in a form of judgment almost. Mm-hmm. When the people asked for a king, Samuel is to tell them, well, this is what he's going to do. He's going to tax you. He's going to force you to do this and that. And they say, well, we still want him. Yeah. And in Amos, the prophet is indicting the people of the land, saying, therefore and this is Amos 5:11, therefore because you trample on the poor and you exact taxes of grain from him, you have built houses of hewn stone, but you shall not dwell in them. You have planted pleasant vineyards, but you shall not drink their wine. So the rulers, and he indicts the religious and the civil leaders for exacting these taxes on the people to line their pockets, and they're living large, when Amos Miller is serving people who in many sense you could consider the poor of the land. I mean, these are people that aren't millionaires. They're buying food from him because many of them have sick family members. They're trying to live a healthier lifestyle. And this is really about money. And when the Constitution was being brought forth, one of the things that the people's concern with it, there's a line when I was listening to this and going out to Amos' farm, this line of a swarm of revenue and excise officers came to my mind. And I said, no, that's in one of the anti-federalist papers somewhere. And I found it, and the warning is, look, if you give the federal government this power to enact any law that's necessary and proper, well, they're going to use it to fleece the people and get money. And he says, it opens a door to the appointment of a swarm of revenue and excise officers to prey, and this is interesting, to prey upon the honest and industrious part of the community. Honest and industrious. I mean, those are perfect words to describe what Amos Miller is doing. He's an honest guy, he's industrious, he's productive, and he's serving his neighbor. But these revenue officers, and that's what the USDA is. I mean, it's not an organization that even knows. I mean, do you trust the USDA for your food safety? Do you trust the CDC for your health? Like, these are not organizations that people generally trust, and they shouldn't. They're organizations that are preying upon the people to benefit the government, the big corporations, some of them. Now,
I'm thinking of Declaration of Independence, where one of their complaints about King George, he has sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance.
Right.
Amos Miller's getting harassed here.
Right.
He's right. And I don't want to throw you off here, but or maybe I do. But if Amos Miller pays his $300,000 fine and stays out of jail, or does go to jail, he and his wife, I myself, I don't know about you, Chris, but I'll just feel so much safer if Amos Miller is in jail where he belongs. We can all just breathe easier. Oh my word! But let's say he pays a $300,000 fine and he just goes on with what he's doing. How has anything improved at all? Oh, I know one way it's improved. Somebody has $300,000, and now we're getting to it.
Right. And yeah, so this language here, barred from the Declaration and the Anti-Federalist Papers to eat up their substance and riot on the spoils of the country. And it's interesting, and this would be a rabbit trail we go down too far. We don't want to do that too much right now, but when the Constitution was being proposed, these were some of the concerns that they had, that this is going to create a federal beast. And they said, you know what, even if that's not the intent, which we could argue about that, which if you read Hamilton's Curse by, I think, Thomas de Lorenzo, you might have to second guess, was it his intent or not? But they said, the Anti-Federalists said, even if that's not the intent, that's where this is going to lead, because it gives the power to have this bureaucracy that will tax the people out of their substance, and they recognize that it's going to come after the honest and the industrious part of society. It's not going to hurt the big Tyson meat company. It's not going to hurt them because they have the lobbyists. They have the $1 million attorneys. It's not going to hurt them. They're in fact going to manipulate the system if you don't have a capitalistic society. It's going to hurt the honest and the industrious part of the community. And right after the war for independence with the British, there were taxes that were starting to be levied upon the people. And the first one, I don't want to get into this too much, but there was a tax upon carriages for the conveyance of persons, for moving, transportation tax, right? And the tax really, this was actually 1794. So this was after the Constitution was approved. And this confirmed the fears of the Anti-Federalists. And James Madison actually wrote to Jefferson and said, the tax on carriages succeeded in spite of the Constitution. So, I mean, of course, he's trying to defend it and say, this shouldn't have happened. But the Anti-Federalists said, this is what's going to happen. And that's what we're seeing now. And that's why this is much deeper than, we just need to go back to Republican values and the Constitution. We need to examine what's biblical here. Is it biblical for the government to be given this power to regulate and control for whatever is necessary for the general welfare.
Yeah, that general welfare clause. Yeah, for sure. I want to talk about even the whole idea of commerce. We have the Commerce Clause, and we're comfortable with the idea of the federal government or any government regulating commerce. Why, though? You know, it talks about under his vine and under his fig tree. Judah dwelt safely. That's a key phrase there. He's under his vine, under his fig tree, from Dan to Beersheba. They were safe. They had private property. Mm-hmm. Private property. They owned the property. They were secure on their own property. Again, another rabbit trail we don't need to go down, but property taxes. Mm-hmm. You will never be secure. You will never be secure in your own property. It'll never be your property as long as you have to pay money to stay there, which is the system that we have now. Yes, that's your house. You pay for that house. You pay for that land. Guess what? Keep paying, and you will have permission to stay there. But that's not what's happening here. It was their vine, their fig tree. And when you have someone else, a third party, stepping in and saying, no, we know better than you. And we're going to regulate the vines, we're going to regulate the fig trees, we're going to regulate the land. You lose safety. Mm-hmm. Isn't it amazing to me, and shame on us, shame on the Christian community for not knowing what the Bible actually says here. And we're okay with the state regulating all these things, and it has no scriptural basis at all. I challenge anyone to go to Moses. When you see forced taxation, for example, you always see it either in apostate Israel or by a foreign king. You do not see that under Moses. And Moses got his 10 Commandments and his law directly from God. Why can't we start there? If we're going to talk about good government, why can't we actually start with a word from God? But even in our Christian circles, Chris, it's like God hasn't spoken to this. Mm-hmm. But he absolutely has.
Right. And I want to get to that. I want to get to Romans 13 and some of the arguments about, why not just submit here. So I want to come to that in a second, but I want to briefly touch on this idea of every man his fig tree and his vine.
Yes.
And I know you do want to come back to that also, as far as some of one of the pagan kings. We'll get to that too, but I wanted to just say here, in Micah chapter 4, you have this prophecy of the mountain of the Lord. And this is a prophecy that is going to be fulfilled in the Christian era, mm-hmm. as the gospel of Jesus Christ spreads, mm-hmm. as people do what you're saying, actually mm-hmm. go back to the Word of God mm-hmm. to see what does it say about mm-hmm. my life, about my marriage, about church, about the civil magistrate. Mm-hmm. And this is a great prophecy. I mean, I just want to, Micah chapter 4, it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and it shall be lifted up above the hills, and people shall flow to it, and many nations shall come, right? Many nations, as you said before, you're a Christian internationalist. All the nations will come and bow to Christ. Yep. Many nations shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. People are going to be moved by the Spirit under the preaching of the gospel to return to the law word of God. This is a great prophecy. It's in Isaiah chapter 2. Micah repeats it here in Micah chapter 4. It's fulfilled in Christ and the spread of the gospel. Verse 3, it says, he shall judge between many peoples and shall decide for strong nations far away. And the next part is interesting, talking about agriculture and farming. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Of course, a great prophecy that when the gospel prevails, there's production, there's industry, there's not needless wars over unjust causes. There's prosperity and farming and you're the fruit. And then the next verse. And so neither shall they learn war anymore, but they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. For the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. I mean, this is a gospel promise. And right in there is this idea of the freedom to be free from oppression and tyranny, to enjoy the bounty of the land. And as to our shame as Christians, as the church has really failed to preach the gospel in this sense, saying this is a gospel promise that as the gospel goes forth and impacts all these different areas of society, this is one part that we'll enjoy. There'll be freedom. There'll be freedom from tyranny. There'll be freedom to enjoy the fruit of your land and to serve your neighbor. So I do want to talk about that as well. A big thing here is the idea of serving neighbor, right? We are commanded to love our neighbor, right? To love God and love neighbor. And maybe this will tie into Romans 13. I don't know where you want to start with this, but what Amos is doing, is it evil? Is it evil what Amos is doing? Why don't we start with that and kind of lay out this case for serving neighbor in the role of government?
It's certainly not evil by any definition I know of in the Bible. For that reason alone, Chris, we should have every person who names the name of Christ in this county defending Amos Miller and challenging the bureaucratization of his farm, because that's what's happening here. The USDA is saying we know what's best for your customers. These are people who probably never even raised a goat for a 4-H county competition here, but we know best, right? And we know best how your farm should be. That's what's going on here, and it's a total travesty. I want to talk about what you said about production here. He is producing. When you talk about beating your swords into plowshares and your spears into pruning hooks, you're talking about war is destructive by nature. So under the gospel, we're talking about going from implements of destruction to implements of production, which is a good, godly, and honorable thing. I am afraid, Chris, that in our modern church situation, we've forgotten about loving your neighbor. And it's just all about loving God. If I just have my relationship with God, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. Well, what if your neighbor's being attacked like Amos is? What about that? Is that just none of my business? Well, I sure hope it's my neighbor's business when I'm being carried off, or when I'm having my, I don't know, maybe they'll be after the yard sales next, right? I once did a lecture.
The IRS agents will be.
Yeah, right. There's 80,000 of them armed with shotguns and whatnot. But I once did a lecture for the Mid-Atlantic Reformation Society called "In Praise of the Yard Sale," and my thesis was, maybe this has changed by now, is that the yard sale is still is the best example of freedom, free exchange that we have left. There's no bureaucrat saying, you paid $50 for that toaster, you're not allowed to sell it for a quarter. None of that. It's laid out there. Nobody's telling you what you can and can't buy, or nobody's trying to make things equal, whatever that means in a case like this. And throughout the scriptures, we see production under godly rule. And that is why you don't see forced taxation under Moses. You just don't see it. In other words, you see taxation, but what you don't see is a penalty if you don't pay the tax. Same way with the tithe, of course, and that, we can talk about that at another time. But taxation is an attack on production. Please understand that. What we're being sold right now is we're being sold the idea that if we aren't taxed, then we don't produce. It's opposite of that. The less taxation, the less production we have. Now, what happens is we get envy get in the way, and our neighbor might be a really good businessman, and our neighbor gets wealthy. And then we want to sit back and say, let's get the federal government to teach him a good lesson. Well, you know what? If our neighbor is making good money because he's providing a good service, it's absolutely none of our business. Any more than it was anyone's business that Job, after God restored him, had twice the amount of animals. And I forget what kind. I think he had camels. I think he had donkeys. I mean, he had thousands of the things. Well, what's Job going to do with all that? You know what? None of your business. Job was obviously a productive man, and he probably helped an awful lot of other people be productive as well. Good for him. Let's stop with the envy. And I believe, Chris, that a lot of our embracing of the feds and the civil authorities attacking our neighbor's wealth, I think there's a lot of envy going on underneath there. And that's so wicked because it's none of our business.
Right. Let's talk about Amos serving his neighbor a little bit more.
Yeah.
Okay, and why don't we let's get into Romans 13.
Okay.
Romans 13. So Romans 13, submit yourself to every ordinance or institution. I'll just read it here. It's translated differently in some different translations, but it's a famous passage that is used, I think misused sometimes, and it says here, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. A lot of people stop there.
Yep.
Let's read the next verse. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. Now, again, we could spend hours on this, but I want to talk about the idea here that the rulers are supposed to be a terror to bad conduct, right? I believe this is a prescriptive passage, not a descriptive one. It's not saying that all rulers at all times are always a terror to bad conduct, because we know they're
some
not.
rules are a terror to good conduct.
Right, a case in point right now, Amos Miller.
Sure.
So let's talk more about God's command to love and serve your neighbor, what Amos is doing, and how he should, in general, how we should respond to the government coming in and saying, you cannot do this, you cannot serve your neighbor, or we're going to regulate this and tax it to the point that it becomes burdensome for you to serve your neighbor.
Yeah. I want to bring in another passage here, and then I want to talk about Romans 13. We get thrown at us all the time, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. The first question we must ask is, okay, so what is Caesar's? And where do we go to find out what's Caesar's? I would suggest not going to Caesar. Caesar is going to wind up saying that it all belongs to me, but me being a benevolent guy, me being a nice guy, I'll let you keep some.
The yard sales.
Yeah. It's too much to regulate. So if you want to sell that toaster for a quarter, I'm not going to worry about it. In any case, though, we need to go to God to find out what belongs to Caesar. We know that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell in it. So it all belongs to God. Whatever belongs to Caesar is only what God says belongs to Caesar. And so we have it here in this passage, because we are told that he is a minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. And then in verse 6, because of this you pay taxes, for they are God's ministers, God's deacons, attending continually to this very thing. We have there a reason why we pay taxes, right there. It is to support the civil magistrate who wields the sword, which is the death penalty for death penalty offenses. And it's not for anything else, according to this passage. You can't go past it. You can't say, that means that if I should have a bureaucrat standing outside my house, or who knows, maybe inside my house, right? And if my 3-year-old daughter says she brushed her teeth and she didn't, well, that's a state problem. They need to come here and regulate that. And you need to feed them certain food and not certain other food or whatever. And by the way, we're going to charge you for an education that you don't even want. There's none of that here. Mm-hmm. None of it. And it is a revenger for him who practices evil. So I'm going to ask, who gets to define evil? Where do we go for that definition? A word from God or a word from man? It is sacrilegious and wicked to go to a word from man when we have a word from God. And some people are going to say, Joel, you're reading into it. I don't think I am. I'm going to tell you why. Let's go on a little bit further. It says, render therefore to all who their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, custom to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. All right, good. It's an avenger for him who practices evil. But I ask the question, who gets to define evil? Well, Paul is, and honestly, in sermons I've heard on this, I've rarely heard this next part. Paul is going to tell us where we're going to go to learn evil. Owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, don't commit adultery, shall not murder, shall not steal, shall not bear false witness, shall not covet. If there's any other commandment, are all summed up in this saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So Paul is telling us in this passage where we're supposed to go to determine what evil is. I don't know, you and I both heard sermons in Romans 13. I don't think I've ever heard one that incorporates Paul's reference to the actual law of God for anyone who has a question about what evil is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. So
let's ask this question. If the murderer is executed, see, this is where, oh, that's not love. It absolutely is love. It is loving to execute the murderer. It's loving to his future victims. Pretty loving. It's loving to the. I don't know how. I don't want this to be too much of a rabbit trail here. How do you recover when someone has taken the life of maybe a loved one, right? And you find out they're going to be out of. They got a 25-year sentence, and they're going to be out in 10, walking around again. How is that loving to the family? A lot more loving, you know what? At least this guy is not going to murder anyone else. Much more loving to him, to all the people that will be terrorized by that murder. Yes, I say it clearly. It's an act of love to perform capital punishment for capital offenses as defined in the scriptures. Quick example here. Adultery is almost like a cool thing nowadays, right? And I was reading, in fact, we were in a counseling session here a few nights ago, my wife and I, right? We were talking about divorce. And where Malachi says God hates divorce, it covers one's garments with violence. I mean, like, what do you mean violence? Divorce, whatever. No. Fornication, adultery, you have often the violence of the conception, which has to be covered up, and the child is killed that's conceived. But interestingly enough, Chris, in these, in a lot of, and murder shows on YouTube are like a big thing now. I mean, everybody's got one. It's like everybody getting murdered around here. In almost every case, Chris, there's somebody cheating on somebody. I would say safely, in 8 out of 10, maybe more like 9 out of 10 of these shows that I've seen, there's almost always somebody cheating on somebody doing something that God says they shouldn't do. Now we mock the idea of adultery being a capital offense. We mock that. Here's Paul saying, don't commit adultery. So we mock that idea, and yet look at all the violence, just like God said, that we have with adultery, fornication, and so forth. Sorry, I think I got down a wrong trail here.
Well,
Chris.
no, it's important. The book of Ecclesiastes talks about how because the sentence against an evil deed is not carried out quickly, the heart of the children of man is set fully to do evil. It's an evil deed when you don't punish it according to Scripture. It emboldens more wickedness. So it's not loving to the community, and it's not loving to that person, because it used to be, if you would be guilty of murder, you'd have your execution date, you'd have a minister come in and preach the gospel to you because you care about that person's soul, and it may be the fact that they are receiving the just recompense of their evil act in society that awakens them to the danger of eternal punishment. And when you don't follow biblical law, you have people that are hardened and emboldened in their sin, and it's not loving to them. So we need to do another show on that.
Well, that's such a big deal. The person being executed has one advantage over the rest of us. You and I don't know the date of our passing.
Right.
That person does. That just might be a motivation to get things right with God.
Right. Well, let's go back to Amos Miller and this idea. So he says, it says Romans 13:10, love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. So I want you to talk about, because people in the community here and elsewhere, some of them are saying, just one, you got to submit to the government. The government's telling you to do this. I want you to talk just a little bit more specifically about this case and this idea that if you're loving your neighbor by serving them, whether it's with food, whether it's with something else, and the government tells you, no, you can't do it. You can't do it the way that you and your neighbors want, even though it's not evil. What do you do? Do you stop? Do you submit? Is that honoring to God to submit to the government when they're not doing what God told them to do, and they're telling you or hindering you from serving your neighbor? Should you submit in that case?
Yeah, the folks that say, you need to submit even though it's wrong, Charles Spurgeon, commenting on Psalm 85, said, no government ever has the right to do wrong. And what people are saying is the government has the right to do, it's wrong, but they have the right to do wrong. Who says? God says. No, God never gave them the right to do wrong. Can we make sure that that's clear from the very beginning? Here's the thing. I remember seeing years ago a group of young, restless reform guys on a YouTube video or some video talking about abortion laws. They're saying, you know what? we really can't expect, we can't expect the wicked people to act righteously, so we're not really sure about abortion laws, is what they were saying, right? And I was steaming. My head was about to pop off. It truly was. This is where my wife, and my mother, she'd be alive, want to give me a tranquilizer. And I was saying, you know what? You're okay with the laws when it's your property, when it's your stuff, and when it's your life. Yeah, now you're not all about, well, if someone wants to come and cut your throat, hey, you know what? You unbelievers, I just really can't expect.
Right.
Wicked. And here's the thing. God expects all nations to go by his law. We know this from the scriptures. Micah talks about it. Isaiah talks about it. Jeremiah talks about it extensively. Amos talks about it. God judges nations that are not the Israelites, and he judges them by his law. And yes, all are expected to obey Christ. No question about that. So in the end, in the case of Amos Miller here and talking about obeying unjust laws, I remember years ago I got in some discussions with some people who were like, no, if the government says it, you got to do it. And I challenged, I said, you know what? Do you know what the government even says? Have you read the Federal Register? No, nobody has. Mm-hmm. Well, then how are you going to obey it? Mm-hmm. Actually, we have a Bible that we can read, and we can figure that out. Some things are more difficult than others, but we have 10 commandments, and they're not too hard to figure out. They're really pretty basic and pretty simple. So maybe we can perhaps start there. But the people that say, well, whatever the government says, wait a minute. Do you really believe that you stand before God, he's going to take out the Federal Register and the Pennsylvania Code and whatever Lancaster counties come up with and whatever my townships come, you know what? Romans 13 says you're supposed to obey all this. I mean, do we really seriously believe that? No, we absolutely don't. And I would ask this question. It was illegal in Rome, early church, to rescue babies that were tossed into the father had complete control. He had complete authority. If he could look at a baby and say, I don't like the looks of that baby, put it outside for the animals or worse. And there were believers that snuck out and they rescued the babies. Now, I'd like to hope that there's no person who names the name of Christ who said, oh, no, that's wrong.
Okay, well, let me interrupt you there for a second. Because I agree with you, right? That
yeah.
they should have disobeyed that government edict and rescued the babies. Same thing with the Hebrew midwives in Exodus, right?
Sure.
The edict, just kill the male babies, and they said, they wouldn't do it, right? Now, but some people are going to say, well, this is not like that. This is not a case of rescuing babies or things like that. This is Amos Miller trying to sell his food to his neighbor, and I believe, and I think you do as well, that it's the same type of thing. One part of the problem is, people say, we say, well, Amos he's not really, loving people and saving them like that. Well, isn't he? I mean, is it only when you physically rescue someone?
Is he loving his neighbor or not?
Right.
Can we answer that question?
Right. And is it important? And one of the things I think maybe some people just don't care about healthy food, which is another issue. And of course, we're not going to be able to convince them in this show. But Amos Miller and his customers believe that the way that God intended the food is the healthiest for us. And I don't know how you could argue with the rise of preservatives and fast food, and has that made us healthier as a nation? So Amos Miller is loving and serving his neighbor, right? Yeah. He is doing, in principle, he's doing the same thing that the early Christians did when they rescued those babies, that were left out to exposure. Right. So I just want you to speak on that people say this isn't that big a deal, this isn't like that, why not just submit here? Why not just let the government regulate this? But that's preventing him from loving his neighbor.
Yeah. I would ask this question. Does any government authority have the right before God, because Christ has all authority. Let's start there. All authority is given to him in heaven and earth. Does any, I'm not talking about power here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they got guns, and they got the
There's
power.
There's a big difference between power and authority.
Yeah, a legitimate authority here. Does any government have the authority to stop neighbor A from loving neighbor B? Mm-hmm. Anywhere in the scriptures? The answer to that is obviously not. Now, someone's going to say, well, but you should just submit anyway. Well, why? Why? why should I not love my neighbor because someone with a gun tells me I can't love my neighbor? Why? I want to know the answer to that. And why should Amos Miller stop selling good food to people who want it? It's an act of love for their neighbor. It's an act of love. It's an act of love either way. They both benefit. I want to go back briefly to the first transaction in the scriptures that I know of, and that is Abram buying the field, or buying a field where he's going to bury Sarah. A lot of people, he bought it from the Hittites. A lot of people believe that they didn't even know each other's language. They knew one language though. It says Abraham, he measured out the silver in their presence, and they agreed on the amount. There was, I don't even know how this could happen, Chris. There was no bureaucrat there telling what the exchange rate is supposed to be. There's nobody regulating the price of land, nobody regulating the value of silver, none of that. It was between Abram and the Hittites, and that is the first exchange that I know of in the scriptures, and it happened across two different cultures, and we know two different cultures, apparently two different languages, and believe it or not, it happened with no government interference. And are we saying that Amos Miller should be able to practice his farm his farm, sell to whom he wants to sell to with no government interference? We're saying that, but we're saying more. We're saying the Bible says it. And even Romans 13 talks about the sword. Whatever you believe about obedience to the state, I would hope that you wouldn't think that Amos Miller should receive capital punishment from the sword for selling water buffalo meat to somebody who wants it.
Yeah, and that's very important, that I think needs to be understood here, that what Amos Miller is doing is loving his neighbor. And
that's what work is, right?
Right, and if people are going to say, well, you should not do that in the name of Romans 13, it's a twisting of Scripture, because it's very clear.
That's irresponsible.
Love does
wicked.
no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. What Amos is doing is not wrong. He's not wronging his neighbor. He's serving his neighbor. And so he can stand before God with a clean conscience saying, I'm obeying the higher law. I mean, this is clear. And you mentioned it, with the Roman, the practice of infant exposure. I mean, the midwives, and I mean, even today, I mean, in Delaware, at the time, what the midwife who helped deliver our children was doing was illegal, because the state had regulated it so much that she was not licensed. And so you expect us to believe that the government has the best interest in mind for babies when our state authorizes abortion? So it's insanity to think that the government is really caring about loving neighbor and serving neighbor when they regulate and outlaw acts of love to a neighbor, and yet they endorse acts of evil. And that's my plea to those in the community that are not behind Amos Miller, because they're saying, well, you got to submit to the government authorities. When does it end, right? Because, and I think of 1984, where the government has regulated, controlled everything, and the food supply is controlled by the government. And Winston and Julia, one of their rendezvous, they have some real food, and it's like this great, we can enjoy, and that's what it feels like in a small way in our country. In Delaware, the raw milk was illegal, right? Purchasing this milk that the government doesn't allow, right? But we're going to enjoy it, rebels, lawbreakers, right? Criminals, but not in God's eyes, right? And that's what matters, and that's what we need to stand on. So, as we near the end here, I want you to come back. I know you wanted to bring up 2 Kings.
Yes,
because
I did.
What is, the government is presenting this, whether it's the USDA or the Department of Education or any of this is for your good.
Yes.
We're going to make things better for you, right? Just
Yes.
like Big Brother in 1984. Without us, you're going to have poverty. Your kids aren't going to be able to read. You're going to die from food poisoning, and we're going to give you, prosperity. And as we talked about, Micah 4, the promise of the gospel is prosperity.
Yes.
Not no adversity or no persecution. That happens in the life of the Christian. But as the gospel spreads, there will be blessing. And the state comes in and tries to pretend to be God. Mm-hmm. So talk about that and your 2 Kings there.
Yeah, so in 2 Kings, Chris, you have the 10 northern tribes that have been carried off by the Assyrians. But the Assyrians aren't done. They want to come down now and carry off Judah. And a lot we could say about this, but we don't have time to. But in any case, to make it very short, King Hezekiah is the king of Judah, and the Assyrians want to come down, and they now want to carry off those that live in the land of Judah. And so they say to him, the king of Assyria sends a representative down, and he says, I got a proposal for you. Either submit to us, or we'll make you wish you had. That's our proposal. It's like an offer they couldn't refuse, right? And listen to this. He says this. He says, thus says the king of Assyria, do not let Hezekiah, the king of Judah, deceive you, for he shall not be able to deliver you from his hand, meaning the king of Assyria's hand. Nor let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord, saying, the Lord will surely deliver us. This city shall not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to Hezekiah, for thus says the king of Assyria, make peace with me by a present and come out to me, and every one of you eat from his own vine, and every one from his own fig tree, and every one of you drink waters from his own cistern. So they learn the language here. Like our governmental authorities today, they learn the language. But I want you to see what's happening here, Chris. This guy is saying, under threat, you're going to love my thing. Right. You know, when we're in charge, you're going to get your own stuff. When we are in charge, and you're not going to get it unless we give it to you, because he's got the threat behind it. Until I come, verse 32, everyone is fig tree, water out of his own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land like your own, a land of grain and new wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of olive groves and honey, that you may live and not die, but do not listen to Hezekiah lest he persuade you. Now, you became a slave when the Assyrians dragged you off. But you have this wonderful promise like the socialists today. It's just going to be so, do what we tell you. You guys don't know how to do it. You don't know how to handle your own vine, your own fig tree. But if you let us take you away, if you let us be in charge of your life, then it's just going to be so wonderful. You know, I think of Spurgeon, who saw the evils of socialism in his day. He had to look forward to it. Now all we have to do is look behind and see the mess and complete disaster that it's been. But it's an old problem. Some powerful authority over other people telling them just how wonderful they can make their lives because they know better.
Right, and that's the pitch, right? If you buy from Amos Miller, you're going to get sick and die, or we need to control this, and we're going to make it much better. We're going to have all the animals packed into a building where they don't see the sun, and we're going to butcher them all together in 10 facilities throughout the nation. And this is going to be better for you because we obviously can handle this sort of thing because the government has never demonstrated a track record of ineptness in any sort of management. So, it's attempting to be God because it's going back to, right, this is the promise that God has made. This is the promise that Christ has. This is a gospel promise that if you submit to the law of the Lord, if the nations will flow and the law will go forth from Zion, then there'll be prosperity and peace. And pagans, socialists come in and say, well, no, we're your Messiah. Right? If you submit to us, we'll give you those things. And it's a counterfeit. It's a counterfeit offer. Well, there's much more we could say here. I think there was one or two more other comments I wanted to make here. We've talked about Amos Miller's customers, right? We've talked about the fact that they're not making the complaints. The fundraiser, by the way, after this has shared on Tucker Carlson and other places, I mean, it's over 50,000, and it's probably higher now since I last checked. I just wanted to read a couple comments from the fundraising site from some donors, potentially customers. Quote, your food is definitely way healthier than most FDA-approved food. The FDA turns a blind eye far too often to nightmarish farming and ranching practices, right? Which I'm sure is like there's how many of these big corporations have issues that are not going to be looked into because they're the ones that are filling the pockets of these bureaucracies. Another one, the war on real true health, physically and spiritually, is accelerating quickly. I pray that God delivers the Miller farm from this attack and delivers future generations from the deceptions and yoke of slavery that our power-hungry bureaucratic system is adamantly pushing on us. So, anything else you want to say here, Joel, as we begin to wrap this up about this Amos Miller case? And the biblical, I guess I'll say something before I turn it over to you here. The biblical, you mentioned socialism. You mentioned Spurgeon seeing it ahead and us looking back. And that's something that I know we try to hit on as much as we can, that Republicans have done, quite a bit to further this socialist agenda of government regulation and control. Of course, we could say Democrats have done it more, but they've done because they haven't gone back to the Scripture, right? The solution here at Amos Miller is not, oh, we just need more Republicans, because they're some of the people that have enforced these bureaucracies and prosecuted cases like this. And we need to go back to the biblical standard, which I know you've already laid out that case. So I just wanted to bring that up again, as you mentioned socialism, and I wanted to give you a final word on that and this whole case.
I had a conversation with a gentleman recently. He's from the Plain community here in Lancaster County. And he said to me, he says, why do they want to destroy good people? Why? And it was actually a little bit challenging for me to explain it to him, but I want to do that from John chapter 10 and verse 10. And I want to contrast the two, because Christ makes a contrast here. He says this, John 10:10, the thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly. There is no question that where Christ is gone, there has been abundant life. Even secular historians have written, for example, the idea of reading. The ability to read just increases a nation's capacity for production exponentially. And I've read secular historians who have said that the history of the growth of reading is also the history of the growth of Christianity. And I wanted to explain, I had a hard time explaining, there are people that said the thief doesn't come except to steal, kill, destroy. There are those that want to steal, kill, and destroy. There is such a thing as the Bolshevik Revolution, for example. There is such a thing as Pol Pot's revolution there in Cambodia, Mao Zedong. It was destruction. It was destruction in the name of happiness, just like what we heard the presentation there to Hezekiah. We must have faith in the Scriptures here. We must have faith in Christ. We must have faith in the Word of God, what it actually says. And if we don't, we will listen to the siren song of that king's representative there in the book of 1 Kings. Mm-hmm. We'll head straight to slavery and be happy about it. And Chris, we have no other route. If we decide that we're going to reject a word from God, if that's what we want to do, then slavery is our only option, Republican or Democrat.
Well said. And I think that'll have to do it for today. For more information about Joel Saint and the Mid-Atlantic Reformation Society, you can go to midatlanticreformation.org. There's also a conference coming up, futureofchristendom.org. futureofchristendom.org. Check out that conference. It'll be very interesting. It'll cover probably some of this material we're talking about here.
Yes, and right now Amos Miller is scheduled to be there.
All right, Lord willing, he will be able to speak. That would be definitely interesting. Look forward to that. There'll be some other speakers as well dealing with the idea of liberty and health and medicine and things like that. For more information about the Lancaster Patriot, go to thelancasterpatriot.com. If you're not a subscriber, subscribe today. We deliver once a week right to your house. And check out Amos Miller's fundraising site. It's on Give, Send, Go. You can also find it linked in the stories on thelancasterpatriot.com. Well, until next time, Joel, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
God bless, and we'll see you next time.